Elizabeth, a literary princess. If you are new here, welcome. I'm a 6-year PhD candidate in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists. And as you might expect, I love to read. Today we are continuing on with my 2024 wrap-up content, and we are going to talk about, did I read my 50 books to read in 2024? So every year I make a list of 50 books that I want to read, and then I keep track as I'm going through to see, all right, how many did I actually read? So, spoiler alert, no, I did not read them all. But we're gonna go through each of them and then tally it up in the end and see. And also kind of see, why did I not read some of them? So we've got 50 books to get through, so I'm gonna go pretty quickly. And also I unhauled a bunch of these, so I don't have them to hold up. So editing me is gonna be really mad at filming me for doing this video in the first place once we get to the editing process, but that is a problem for editing me and not filming me. Let's jump in. First up was Antigone by Sophocles, and I did read this. This is an ancient Greek play, one of the 3 Theban plays. It is a tragedy, and I enjoyed it. I gave it a 3.5 star, but I think I would like it more if I kind of studied it in a course or saw it performed. I am getting rid of my copy just because it's a crappy Dover thrift edition, and if I want a copy of these plays, I'll buy a Penguin or something. Next up, Ariadne by Ouida. This was for my dissertation, and I hated it. I hated it so much. I gave this 2 stars. It made me not want to include Ouida in my dissertation, but Ouida and I are getting along better now, so it's okay. But yeah, no, rough go. The Biographer's Tale by A.S. Byatt, another rough go, and a really disappointing one because I was looking forward to this since Possession is one of my favorite books. So yeah, I gave this one 2 stars as well, and I am unhauling it. Yeah, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. Frankly, I don't even know what the hell it was. It was bizarre, but yeah, hated it. I gave it 2 stars and not 1 because I could appreciate the quality of the writing. Bitter Orange by Claire Fuller, another one that I am getting rid of. It's not that I disliked it. I gave it 3 stars, but it's not one that I would want to reread or even to lend out to people. I felt very meh about it. It started great, but the ending was just The Book of Gothel. This is a retelling of Rapunzel by Mary McMinn. It is historical fiction with a little bit of fantasy. There is fantasy elements, but it's more on the historical fiction end of things. I really enjoyed this. I give it 4 stars. Cecilia by Frances Burney, one of my top reads of the year. So yes, I did read it, and all of it, and I gave it 5 stars. Fairy Tales of Charles Perrault, which I read in French. This was my first full-length book in French, and I was super proud of myself. It was really hard, but the fact that I was familiar with all except the last 2 stories was very helpful. So I gave this 5 stars. I did not put it on my top reads of the year because technically most of them were rereads, even though I was reading them in a different language. But yeah, loved. Daisy Chain by Charlotte Mary Young. Yes, I did read this, and I gave it 4 stars. It is a lovely family story about the maze, and it reminded me a lot of Little Women. First of the rereads, there are only 3 rereads on here. I used to not include rereads at all, but then I was doing the George Eliot project, and I wanted to include my read for Jane Austen July, so I decided to include them. This is Daniel Deronda by George Eliot. I did read this for my George Eliot project. It is my favorite by her, 5 stars. Dear Committee Members by Julie Schumacher. I did read this. I gave it 5 stars. I am actually unhauling it because I just don't feel the need to keep it, but it was really fun, like really hilarious. It had me laughing out loud and reading parts to my husband. So, a highly recommended one. Deerbrook by Harriet Martineau. I did read it and I gave it 5 stars. It was this close to being on my top 10 list for the year, but I had a lot of really good ones this year. But I did love this so much. The Doctor's Wife by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. I read this for my dissertation because I am writing a chapter on it. And I did read it, yes. I gave it 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I wish I had my physical copy here, but it's in my office on campus. And now we get to the first of the ones I did not read. And this is Eleanor's Victory by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. So my plan was to read 2 books by each of my dissertation's authors, and I just kind of picked Eleanor's Victory because it was another of her fairly early ones, and I'm not like reading her in publication order, but I was like, why not? However, I ended up switching it out for The Lady's Mile. So Eleanor's Victory, I think, is one that I might try to get to in 2026. We'll see what happens. Emily Wilde's Map of the Other Lands by Heather Fawcett. This is the 2nd book in the Emily Wilde series, and I did read it. It was my first book of the year. It was 5 stars. It's on my top 10 list. From my top 10 list, Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I loved this so much. It's like King wrote it for me. Just a portal fantasy that's a story about a boy and his dog. Like, oh, you wrote it for me. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. King. Loved it. Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Finally, I did in fact read this. I had wanted to read it in 2023. Didn't happen. It happened now. I do have a physical copy, but now my mom is reading it, so I don't have it with me. This was, I think, 4 stars. Might have been 4.5. I don't remember. Not my favorite Hardy book, but still really loved it. I love everything that I've read by Hardy. More George Eliot. This is Felix Holt the Radical. I did read it. I gave this 4 stars, although it was more like a 4.25. But I don't really do quarter ratings just because I'm like, it's too complicated. But I did really like this, and I think this is one of her better plotted books. Like, the pacing is really good in a way that Middlemarch and Daniel Deronda just aren't. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by this because I thought I was gonna hate it. The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. I did read it, and it was my 2nd favorite book of the year. Utterly fantastic fantasy book. Cannot wait to read the rest of the book set in this world. One I did not get to, this is The Heir of Redcliffe by Charlotte Mary Young. I am hoping to read that this month, actually. It is on my 2025 list, and I would like to get it out of the way quickly. That makes it sound like I'm not gonna like it. I think I really will like it, but since it's a carryover, I want to read it early on in the year. Her Mother's Darling by Charlotte Riddle. I did not read this one. I did, however, I didn't read either of the Charlotte Riddle books on here, but I did read 2 different books by her. So in place of Her Mother's Darling, I read The Moors and the Fens. How to Be a Victorian by Ruth Goodman. I read this during Victober and really enjoyed it. 4 stars. I'm so glad that I finally read it because I've had it since 2019. So, yeah. Oops. Ideala by Sarah Grand. I just read this in December and I did not like it. I gave it 2 stars. Definitely the worst one of Sarah Grand's New Woman trilogy. She gets so much better. The Idiot by Elif Batuman. Yes, I did read this one. I am unhauling it. It was in my unhaul video. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I just don't think I'll reread it. Impressions of Theophrastus Such by George Eliot. George Eliot's final piece of fiction. They're supposed to be essays by this fictional scholar. don't even talk to me. I hated it. I gave it 1.5 star. That half star was because I thought that one of the essays might be useful in my dissertation, but I'm probably not even going to use it there because I hated it. Jane Austen, A Life by Claire Tomalin. I did read this during Jane Austen July and I gave it 4 stars. I think it was a great biography of her. The Ladies Lindors by Margaret Oliphant. I did not read this one. Instead, I switched it out for The Ways of Life, which is a collection of 2 novellas. I will be reading The Ladies Lindor this year in 2025. A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. Another one that I'm unhauling. I think I gave it 3 stars, but honestly, it's more like a 2.5. Thinking back on it, I was disappointed with this one. Just, especially, it was so pretty. I wanted it to be great, but I just don't think dark academia in high school works for me. Like, it needs to be university setting. Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki Sujimura. I did read this one and it was beautiful. And it made me tear up quite a lot. I gave this 4.5 stars. It is kind of a magical realism portal fantasy about a group of kids who are able to go through their mirrors into this magical world when they are not going to school because they, for each of their own reasons, are skipping. Truly beautiful. Truly beautiful. Love and Friendship by Jane Austen. Not only did I read Love and Friendship, but I read the entirety of volume 2 of her Juvenilia. I enjoyed this. It was a lot of fun. I'm pretty sure it was 4 stars for the whole collection. It's just really fun to see what Jane Austen was doing before she wrote her famous novels. For a reread and more George Eliot, this is Middlemarch, my nemesis that I ended up falling in love with and gave 4.5 stars. And it was on my top 5 rereads of the year list, sitting at number 5. The Mirror Season by Anna Marie Miclemore. This is a loose retelling of The Snow Queen. And I read this pretty recently, I guess it was in November, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Mistress and Maid by Dinah Mullet-Craik. I did not get to this one, and this is another one that I'm hoping to read in January. It's on my 2025 list, and I would just like to get the carryovers finished early in the year. More Tumblr's Estate by Charlotte Riddle. So as I said, I did not read either of the Charlotte Riddle books on here. I switched this one out for The Uninhabited House. Grub Street by George Gissing. I did read this. I really enjoyed it. Trying to remember if it was 4 or 4.5. I feel like it should have been 4.5, but you never know. Anyway, I really liked this, and it actually is really helpful for my dissertation for writing the introduction and giving some context, and also for comparing to Charlotte Riddle's A Struggle for Fame. The Night Dance by Suzanne Wen. This is a retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses. I did read it. I didn't really like it that much. Like, it was cute, but meh. So I give it 2.5 stars, and I am unhauling it. Perpetual Curate by Margaret Oliphant. This was the last book in the Chronicles of Carlingford that I had to read, and I did read it and really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This was a reread, and I did read it, and I really enjoyed it, especially because I hadn't read it since I was 17 years old. So it was just nice to be back there. Did I say it was 5 stars? Obviously it's 5 stars. Princess Napraxine by Ouida, which has been on these lists for like the past 3 years or something stupid like that. And no, I didn't read it. Oh man, it's on my 2025 list. Instead of reading Princess Napraxine, I started reading Pasquerel, which I did not finish, but I am like a third of the way through now. Richard and John, Kings at War by Frank McLynn. I did not end up getting to this one. It just didn't happen. It's not on my 2025 list, but I would like to read it in 2025 if I can. Sensational Victorian, The Life and Fiction of Mary Elizabeth Braddon by Robert Lee Wolfe. I did read this. My copy is at the library, or my copy, the library copy is at the library in my office. But I enjoyed it. It was very helpful for my dissertation, and I gave it 4 stars. Sister Novelists, the Trailblazing Porter Sisters Who Paved the Way for Austen and the Brontes by Devani Lucer. This was my 4th best book of the year, so yes, I did read it and I absolutely loved it. Six Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. I did read this. It is a retelling of The Six Swans, or The Wild Swans, depending on which variant you're looking at. And I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it a lot, but I'm not going to be continuing with the series just because I didn't really care about like the through plot line. I cared about the Six Swans plot line, which was like kind of the main plot line here. But there is stuff that's obviously meant to carry over into the second book, but it's not to do with the fairy tale. So I'm just going to leave it as a standalone. The Stranger, or L'Étranger by Albert Camus. So this was the second book in French that I wanted to read. I did not get to it, but as you can see, I am currently reading it. I am on page 16, which is not very far in. This is really hard. This is really hard. I'm gonna keep doing it because it's good for me. I know that it's good for me, but yeah, this is super hard. A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. I did read this. I'm gonna be honest, I thought I read this in 2023. And then I looked at the list, I was like, oh no, that was this year. Really? Huh. I think I got it for Christmas of last year, or Christmas of 2023. So yeah, I did read this. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I just forgot that I read it. They Never Learn by Lane Fargo. This I did read, and I can't remember if I gave it a 3 or a 3.5, but I was ultimately disappointed in it because I was expecting dark academia, and even though it is set at a university, it's really just more of a typical mystery thriller book. So, a little disappointing. I am unhauling it. Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. This is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, and I did read it. Very short, very cute. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. I just finished this in December. It was one of my top reads of the year. 5 stars. Absolutely loved it. So glad that I did end up getting to it. The Winter's Tale by William Shakespeare. I read this for Shake-Tember, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. I gave it 4 stars. I've seen 2 productions of it, actually. So I already knew the story, I just had never read it before. The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reid. I picked this up thinking it was a Little Red Riding retelling. It is not, but it is very good. I gave it 4 stars, and like Felix Holt, it was really more of a 4.25, but I'm like, I'm not doing that. So, very good, glad that I read it, even though it's not a fairy tale retelling. And finally, book 50, Yellow Face by R.F. Kuang, which I did read very early in the year. I think I got this for Christmas too. And I gave this 4 stars. I enjoyed it quite a lot. So those are the 50 books. I read 41 out of 50, which is 82%. And honestly, that's really good for me. I think that's more than I usually manage. It's hard for me to know because I do go back to each list in years after and like check off books. So I think I'm not going to do that anymore because I want to be able to compare. But I think this is really, really good for me. And I hope I can keep up that momentum in 2025, but we'll see what happens. So those are the 50 books that I wanted to read in 2025, 41 of which I did. Let me know down in the comments, have you read any of these? What did you think? Did you read all of the books that you wanted to get to in 2024? What did you think of them? Which ones were you not able to get to? If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more of my bookish content. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.